You know that feeling when you say something and immediately wish you could take it back? Yeah, that was me on a Tuesday afternoon that completely changed my life. Let me tell you how I managed to anger one of the most powerful women in the business world, and somehow ended up becoming the only person who could calm her down. I'm a corporate consultant. Basically, companies hire me to come in, look at how they're running things, and tell them what they're doing wrong. It's not the most popular job in the world, trust me. People don't exactly love it when some outsider walks into their office and starts pointing out problems. But I'm good at what I do, and I've always believed in being honest even when it's uncomfortable. My firm had just landed a huge contract with Titan Industries. If you haven't heard of them, they're massive. We're talking billions of dollars, thousands of employees, offices in practically every major city. And running this entire empire was Victoria Ashford Montgomery. People in the industry called her the Colossal Queen, though never to her face. She was tall, intimidating, and had built this company into what it was through sheer determination and brilliance. When my boss told me I'd be working on the Titan account, I felt both excited and terrified. This was the kind of project that could make or break a career. I spent my first 2 weeks just trying to understand how everything worked. The company was huge, complicated, and honestly pretty impressive in a lot of ways. But there was one thing that kept bothering me. Their inventory management system was outdated, like really outdated. I'm talking about methods that most companies had moved away from years ago. It seemed strange that such a forward-thinking company would be using such old-fashioned processes. The big presentation day arrived. I was supposed to show Victoria and her executive team what I'd found so far. The conference room was massive with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Victoria sat at the head of the table, and let me tell you, her presence filled that entire room. She had this way of looking at you that made you feel like she could see right through any nonsense. I started my presentation, going through the numbers, showing charts and graphs. Everything was going fine until I got to the inventory system. This is where I made my huge mistake. I used the words surprisingly primitive to describe their methods. I even said that small businesses were more modern than what Titan was currently doing. The moment those words left my mouth, the temperature in the room seemed to drop about 20 degrees. Everyone stopped writing notes. People weren't even pretending to look at their phones anymore. They were all just frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. Victoria's fingers, perfectly manicured and usually graceful, drummed once on the wooden table. Just once, but that single sound felt louder than a thunderclap. Her green eyes locked onto mine, and I felt like a deer caught in headlights. "Meeting dismissed," she said in this calm, cold voice that was somehow scarier than if she'd yelled. "Everyone except our consultant here." I watched as the other executives practically ran out of that conference room. A couple of them gave me these looks that clearly said, "Nice knowing you." The door closed, and suddenly it was just me and the Colossal Queen, and I was pretty sure my career was about to end. For the next 20 minutes, Victoria took apart every single assumption I'd made. But it wasn't random anger. She explained, point by point, exactly why their system worked the way it did. There were supplier relationships that went back decades. There were quality control measures that automated systems couldn't replicate. There were efficiency considerations I hadn't even thought about. But then her voice changed slightly, got a little softer, but somehow more intense. She started talking about her father. He had founded Titan Industries 30 years ago, starting from nothing. That inventory system I'd called primitive, he had designed it himself, spent years perfecting it, and it had been one of the keys to the company's early success. Her father had passed away 5 years ago, suddenly and unexpectedly. Victoria had inherited the company at just 28 years old. A lot of people had doubted her, thought she was too young, too inexperienced. She'd spent these last 5 years proving them wrong, protecting everything her father had built, and I, in my infinite wisdom, had walked into her conference room and casually dismissed her father's work as surprisingly primitive. I felt about 2 inches tall. When she finally finished speaking, I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry" seemed completely inadequate. "I didn't know" sounded like a pathetic excuse. So I just sat there feeling like the biggest fool in the world. "You'll receive further instructions," she said, turning back to her computer. That was clearly my cue to leave. I gathered my papers with shaking hands and walked back to my temporary office in their building. I started packing up my stuff, figuring I'd be escorted out within the hour. My phone kept buzzing with messages from colleagues asking what happened, but I couldn't bring myself to answer them. Then, At 6 o'clock that evening, I got an email directly from Victoria. My hands were actually trembling as I opened it. This was it, the official termination. Except it wasn't. The email said my contract was being extended. Instead of working with the general operations team, I would now be reporting directly to Victoria for the remainder of the project. I read it 3 times, not quite believing it. I should have felt relieved. I still had my job, but something about that email filled me with dread. Victoria wasn't the type to forgive and forget. If she was keeping me around, it was for a reason. And I had a feeling that reason wasn't going to be pleasant. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the conference room scene in my head, seeing her face when I said those words, hearing the pain underneath her anger when she talked about her father. I'd hurt her, not just professionally but personally, and I hadn't even realized I was doing it. The next morning, I showed up to work early, trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming. I didn't have to wait long. At 8:30, Victoria's assistant appeared at my door with a stack of folders about 6 inches thick. "Ms. Ashford Montgomery needs these reports completed by Friday," she said pleasantly, setting them on my desk. I looked at the folders, then at the calendar. It was Wednesday. This Friday? As in 3 days from now? That's correct. She'll expect detailed analysis on each division, with recommendations for improvement. The assistant smiled, but there was sympathy in her eyes. Good luck. As I opened the first folder and saw what was inside, I realized exactly what Victoria was doing. This wasn't just work. This was punishment. These were tasks that would normally take a team of consultants weeks to complete. She expected me to do it all alone in 3 days. I looked at the mountain of work in front of me, took a deep breath, and got started. If Victoria wanted to test me, I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of watching me quit. I'd made a mistake, a big one, and now I was going to prove that I could handle whatever she threw at me. What I didn't know then was that this was just the beginning. That impossible deadline was nothing compared to what was coming. And somehow, through all the challenges and conflicts ahead, Victoria and I were going to end up in a place neither of us ever expected. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, I had to survive the next 3 days. You ever pull an all-nighter and think you're going to die? Try pulling 3 all-nighters in a row. That's what my life became after Victoria gave me that impossible assignment. I'm talking 18-hour days, living on coffee and those sad little sandwiches from the vending machine, barely seeing daylight. My apartment basically became a place where I showered and maybe caught a few hours of sleep before dragging myself back to the office. The reports Victoria wanted weren't simple either. She needed complete operational analysis of 5 different divisions. That meant going through years of financial data, interviewing department heads, analyzing workflow patterns, and coming up with detailed recommendations for improvement, the kind of work that consulting firms usually assign to entire teams with months to complete. My colleagues started avoiding me in the hallways. I heard the whispers. "She's destroying him. He should just quit." This is what happens when you cross the Queen. That nickname, the Colossal Queen, started to make sense. Victoria ruled her empire with absolute authority, and I'd committed the crime of disrespecting it. But here's the thing. As brutal as those 3 days were, something interesting started happening. The deeper I got into Titan Industries' operations, the more I understood the complexity of what Victoria was managing. This wasn't just a company. It was like a living organism with thousands of moving parts, all of which had to work together perfectly. I started seeing patterns I'd missed in my initial review. The inventory system I'd criticized, it was actually integrated with their quality assurance process in ways that modern automated systems couldn't replicate. Her father hadn't been old-fashioned. He'd been innovative in ways that weren't obvious at first glance. Friday afternoon came faster than I expected. I'd finished the report somehow, though I'm pretty sure I looked like something that had crawled out of a cave. My eyes were bloodshot, my shirt was wrinkled, and I'm fairly certain I'd forgotten to comb my hair that morning. Victoria's assistant collected the reports at exactly 5 o'clock. "She'll review these over the weekend," she told me. "She wants to meet with you Monday morning at 8. I went home and slept for 14 hours straight. Monday morning, I was back in that intimidating conference room, watching Victoria flip through my reports. She didn't say anything for a long time, just read, occasionally making notes in the margins. My coffee was getting cold, and I was trying not to look as nervous as I felt. Finally, she looked up. "These are thorough," she said, which I think might have been the closest thing to a compliment I was going to get. Then she slid a new folder across the table. "Now I need you to synthesize all of this into a strategic plan for the next fiscal year." My heart sank. Here we go again. But this time was different. She actually explained what she was looking for, asked for my input on certain aspects, treated me less like someone being punished, and more like someone she was testing. It was still brutally hard work, but there was a purpose to it now. The next few weeks fell into this intense pattern. Victoria would give me assignments that seemed impossible. I'd somehow complete them, and then we'd meet to discuss the results. Our meetings got longer, started including more actual conversation instead of just her giving orders. I learned more about Titan Industries in those weeks than I had in my entire career studying other companies. But more than that, I was learning about Victoria herself, the woman behind the title of Colossal Queen. One night I was working late again. Around 9 o'clock I needed a specific file from the archives. The company had this whole section of their building dedicated to old records and historical documents. Most of it was being digitized, but a lot of the original paperwork was still there. I found what I needed, but then I got curious. I started looking through the old files about Titan's founding. There were newspaper clippings about Victoria's father, photos of the original small office where everything started, records of those first difficult years when the company almost went under multiple times. Then I found articles from 5 years ago. Victoria Ashford Montgomery, named CEO following father's death. Industry questions young leaders' readiness. Titan Industries faces uncertain future. I read through dozens of articles, and the picture they painted broke my heart a little. Victoria had been 28 when her father died suddenly of a heart attack. She'd been working at the company, learning the business, but everyone expected her father to lead for at least another decade. Instead, she was thrown into the deep end while grieving, while being doubted by everyone from the board members to industry analysts. The articles from that first year were brutal. Every decision she made was questioned. People openly speculated about when she would fail, when the company would be sold or broken up. Some of the criticism was professional, but a lot of it felt personal. They called her inexperienced, naive, in over her head. But then the tone started to shift. Year 2, Titan's profits increased 20%. Year 3, they acquired 2 smaller competitors. Year 4, they expanded into 3 new markets. Year 5, they were being called one of the most innovative companies in the industry. Victoria had taken everything her father built and made it stronger. She'd proven every doubter wrong. And she'd done it while carrying the weight of grief and the pressure of living up to an almost impossible legacy. I sat there in that archive room, surrounded by old papers and photos, and suddenly understood why my careless words in that conference room had hit so hard. I hadn't just criticized a business system. I'd disrespected the foundation of everything she'd fought so hard to protect and honor. I'd dismissed her father's legacy without knowing the story, without understanding what it meant. I was so lost in thought that I didn't hear the footsteps behind me. Find what you were looking for? I jumped about a foot in the air. Victoria was standing in the doorway, still in her work clothes, looking at me with an unreadable expression. For a second, I felt like I'd been caught doing something wrong, sitting there reading about her personal tragedy. "I'm sorry," I said quickly, starting to gather up the articles. I needed a file, and then I just started reading, and I should have minded my own business. "It's not a secret," she said, walking into the room. She picked up one of the articles, the one with the headline questioning her readiness. "These were difficult times." "I can't imagine," I said honestly. "Taking over while dealing with losing your father, having everyone doubt you, the pressure of it all." She was quiet for a moment, still looking at the article. "Do you know what the worst part was? Not the doubters, not the pressure, not even the grief, though that was terrible enough. It was the feeling that if I failed, I would be failing him, that I would let his life's work crumble because I wasn't strong enough, smart enough, good enough." There was something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Vulnerability. The colossal queen, the woman who commanded boardrooms and made billion-dollar decisions, sounded tired and human. "But you didn't fail," I said. "You did the opposite. You honored everything he built and made it even better." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in her expression. "Why are you still here?" "Working late on the strategic plan," I answered. "No, I mean, why are you still here at Titan? After how I treated you, The impossible demands. The way I threw you to the wolves in front of the board. Most people would have quit or at least started looking for other opportunities. I thought about that. Honestly, at first it was just stubbornness. I made a mistake and I wanted to prove I could handle whatever you threw at me. But then I started actually understanding this company, seeing how everything connects, learning the real story instead of making surface-level judgments. I'm still here because this is the most interesting work I've ever done, even when it's incredibly difficult. Something I said must have resonated because Victoria smiled. It was small, but it was genuine. You've changed your approach in the last few weeks. I realized I was trying to fix things that weren't broken. I was so focused on making everything match textbook efficiency that I wasn't seeing the bigger picture. Your father's systems, the ones I criticized, they work because they're built on relationships and trust, not just algorithms and automation. We talked for another hour in that archive room, surrounded by the history of Titan Industries. Victoria told me stories about her father, about learning the business from him, about the values he'd instilled in her. I shared some of my own background, my drive to prove myself in a competitive field, my tendency to speak first and think later. When we finally left the building, it was almost midnight. As we walked to the parking garage, Victoria said something that surprised me. Same time tomorrow night? I could use your perspective on the international expansion proposal. It wasn't an order. It was an invitation. I'll be there, I said. Things were changing between us. The anger had burned out, replaced by something I couldn't quite name yet. Mutual respect, maybe. Understanding. The beginning of something that felt almost like friendship, though neither of us would have called it that. I had no idea that in just a few weeks, everything would fall apart in ways I couldn't have predicted. But for that moment, walking to our cars under the city lights, things felt like they were finally moving in the right direction. The next month was different from anything I'd experienced before. Victoria and I fell into this routine where we'd work late together several times a week, discussing strategy, debating ideas, sometimes just talking about the challenges of business and life. The impossible demands didn't stop, but they felt less like punishment and more like she was genuinely pushing me to be better. I got to see a side of Victoria that most people never saw. In board meetings, she was still the colossal queen, commanding and decisive. But in those late-night strategy sessions, she let her guard down. She talked about her doubts, her fears that she'd make a wrong decision that could hurt thousands of employees, the loneliness that came with being at the top. "Do you know what the hardest part of this position is?" she asked me one evening. We were in her office, the city sprawling out below us through the huge windows. "It's not the business decisions. Those are actually the easy part. It's the isolation. When you're the CEO, especially of a company this size, everyone treats you differently. People tell you what they think you want to hear instead of the truth. They're careful around you, intimidated by you. It's like being in a glass cage." I understood what she meant, though from a completely different angle. I've always had the opposite problem. I say exactly what I'm thinking, and it gets me in trouble more often than not. She laughed at that. Case in point, that first presentation. Yeah, I walked right into that one, I admitted. Though in my defense, if I'd known the full story, I would have approached it completely differently. Would you, though? Victoria turned to look at me. Or would you have just found a more diplomatic way to say the same thing? One of the things I've come to appreciate about you is that you don't patronize me. When you think something needs to change, you say it. You just learn to understand the context first. There was something in the way she looked at me that made my heart beat a little faster. I tried to ignore it. This was my client. This was one of the most powerful executives in the industry. This was absolutely not someone I should be developing feelings for. But feelings don't really care about what makes sense, do they? I started noticing little things. How her eyes lit up when she talked about a new innovation. The way she'd absently twirl her pen when she was deep in thought. How she took her coffee black with exactly half a spoon of sugar. The fact that she kept a photo of her father on her desk but turned it face down during difficult meetings, like she couldn't bear to disappoint him even in death. I was falling for her, and that terrified me. Because this wasn't just some workplace crush that would fade. This was something deeper, something real, and it was completely impossible. What I didn't know was that Victoria was having similar thoughts. She'd later tell me that she started looking forward to our meetings, that she found herself thinking about our conversations at random times during the day, that she'd started to rely on my perspective in ways she hadn't relied on anyone since her father died. But we were both professional enough, or maybe scared enough not to say anything. We kept our relationship strictly focused on work, even as it became increasingly clear that we'd become more than just consultant and client. Then everything changed. It started with a call during a regular Tuesday morning meeting. Victoria's assistant interrupted us, looking pale. "I'm sorry, but you need to take this immediately." Victoria stepped out, and when she came back 5 minutes later, her face was stone. "We have a situation. A rival company, Meridian Corp., had just launched a hostile takeover attempt. They'd been quietly buying up Titan shares for months and had just gone public with an offer that was making shareholders seriously consider selling. But here's where it got worse. The vulnerability they were exploiting, the weakness in Titan's structure that made this takeover possible, was something I'd identified in one of my reports 2 weeks ago. I'd flagged it as a potential risk that needed to be addressed. We'd been planning to fix it, but we hadn't moved fast enough. The board called an emergency meeting that afternoon. I wasn't supposed to be there, but Victoria asked me to come, to explain the analysis I'd done. I thought I was there to help solve the problem. I was wrong. The meeting was a disaster from the start. Board members were panicking, arguing, pointing fingers. Some were actually advocating for accepting Meridian's offer. Others were blaming Victoria for not moving faster on the restructuring. The tension in that room was suffocating. Then one of the board members, an older guy who'd never liked Victoria's leadership, turned his attention to me. "This consultant of yours identified the vulnerability 2 weeks ago." 2 weeks? Why wasn't it addressed immediately? Why did we even give him access to this sensitive information? Other board members picked up on that thread. Questions started flying. Was I trustworthy? Had I leaked information to Meridian? Was it just a coincidence that they launched their attack right after I'd mapped out Titan's weaknesses? I tried to defend myself, to explain that I'd recommended immediate action on the restructuring, but they weren't listening. They were looking for someone to blame, and I was the convenient target. Then Victoria spoke, and my world fell apart. "Perhaps the board raises a valid concern," she said, her voice cold and formal. "The timing is suspicious. We brought in an outside consultant, gave him complete access to our operations, and within weeks we're facing a precisely targeted attack. Maybe we need to consider whether that was a coincidence or something more calculated." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. She was throwing me under the bus. After all those late nights, all those conversations, all the mutual respect we'd built, she was sacrificing me to save herself. "I recommend we suspend his contract immediately and have our legal team investigate whether any confidential information was improperly shared," she continued, not meeting my eyes. 2 security guards appeared at the door. I was escorted out of that boardroom, out of the building. My access credentials deactivated, my laptop and files confiscated. The whole thing happened so fast I barely processed it. I sat in my car in the parking garage, hands shaking, trying to understand what had just happened. I'd been betrayed, not just professionally but personally, by someone I'd thought understood me, someone I'd started to care about deeply. My phone started buzzing with calls from my firm, from colleagues, from people who'd already heard the news. I ignored them all. I drove home in a daze, went into my apartment, and just sat there in the dark. I'd been so stupid. All those late nights, all those personal conversations, the connection I thought we were building, it had all been in my head. To Victoria, I was just a consultant, just another piece on her corporate chessboard. When push came to shove, when she needed to protect herself and her company, she hadn't hesitated to sacrifice me. The betrayal hurt worse than anything I'd experienced in my professional life. Because it wasn't just professional. I'd let myself care about her, let myself believe that she cared about me too. And she'd proven that all of that meant nothing when her empire was threatened. Over the next few days, I watched from the outside as Titan Industries spiraled. The takeover attempt gained momentum. Key executives started leaving. The stock price dropped. Media reports talked about the company being in chaos, about Victoria losing control. Part of me felt vindicated. She'd made a huge mistake throwing me out, and now she was paying for it. But another part of me, the part that had seen her vulnerability, that had heard her talk about her fears and her father's legacy, that part just felt sad. My firm was surprisingly understanding. They knew I hadn't leaked anything. They offered to place me on another project to help me move past this disaster, but I couldn't focus on anything. I just kept replaying that board meeting in my head, hearing Victoria's cold voice as she questioned my integrity. A week after my dramatic exit, I got a call from Jennifer, Victoria's right-hand executive. "We need to talk," she said. "Not about company business. About Victoria. We met at a coffee shop far from Titan's offices." Jennifer looked exhausted. "She's falling apart," she said bluntly. "I've worked with her for 6 years and I've never seen her like this. She's making mistakes, missing obvious solutions, snapping at everyone. The board is talking about replacing her." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Because you're the only person who seemed to get through to her. Those weeks you two were working together, she was different, better, more balanced. She trusted you." "She had a funny way of showing it," I said. "She accused me of corporate espionage in front of the entire board." Jennifer sighed. She panicked. The board was turning on her, threatening to use the takeover as an excuse to remove her from the CEO position. She thought if she blamed you, she could redirect their anger and buy herself time to fix things. It was a terrible decision made in a moment of fear. That doesn't make it okay. I know. I'm not asking you to forgive her. I'm just telling you that she's drowning, and whether you like it or not, you're the only person who knows how to reach her right now. I went home and tried to forget that conversation, tried to convince myself that what happened to Victoria and Titan Industries wasn't my problem anymore, tried to move on with my life. I lasted 3 more days before my resolve broke, because the truth was, despite everything, we talked through the night. Victoria explained the pressure she'd been under, the board members who'd been looking for any excuse to replace her, the fear that had made her lash out at the only person who'd actually been trying to help her. She talked about how the moment she'd accused me in that meeting, she'd known it was wrong. But by then it was too late to take it back. "I've been a mess since you left," she admitted as dawn started breaking outside her windows. "Jennifer says I'm falling apart, and she's right. The board is right too. I haven't been making good decisions. I can't focus. I can't sleep. I keep thinking about what I did to you and hating myself for it." "Why?" I asked. "Why does it matter so much? I was just a consultant." Victoria looked at me and I saw tears in her eyes for the first time. "Because you weren't just a consultant. You were the first person in years who saw me as Victoria, not just as the CEO or the Colossal Queen or Victoria Ashford Montgomery's daughter. You challenged me, supported me, understood me, and I destroyed that because I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of the board. Of failing. Of losing my father's company. Of losing you." She wiped at her eyes. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for another chance. Not just professionally, though the company desperately needs your help, but personally too, because somewhere between hating you for that first presentation and working with you every night, I fell for you, and I'm terrified because I don't know how to do this, how to let someone in, how to be vulnerable, but I'm more terrified of not trying." I sat there processing everything she'd said. Part of me wanted to walk out, to protect myself from getting hurt again. But another part of me, the part that had been falling for her too, knew that people make mistakes when they're scared and desperate. Knew that real connection was worth fighting for, even when it was messy and complicated. "If we do this," I said slowly, "things have to change. I'm not going to be your scapegoat the next time things get difficult. And we need to figure out how to separate the personal from the professional, because both are complicated enough on their own." "Whatever you need," Victoria said. "Whatever it takes. Also," I added, "we need to fix this takeover situation. Because as angry as I am at you, I don't want to watch your father's company get destroyed." For the first time in our conversation, Victoria smiled. "So you'll come back?" "On one condition," I said. "No more late-night working sessions in your office. If we're going to figure out this personal thing, we need boundaries. Work is work. Personal time is personal time. Deal," she agreed. As I left her apartment that morning, I had no idea if we'd actually be able to fix everything. The company was still in crisis. The takeover was still threatening. Our relationship, whatever it was becoming, was still fragile and uncertain. But for the first time in weeks, I felt hope. Walking back into Titan Industries headquarters felt surreal. The same building where I'd been escorted out by security just 2 weeks ago. But this time was different. This time I had Victoria's full support, a clear mission, and something to prove. The news of my return spread through the company faster than I expected. People stared as I walked through the hallways. Some looked curious, others confused, a few openly hostile. I couldn't blame them. From their perspective, I'd been accused of potentially sabotaging the company, and now I was back like nothing had happened. Victoria called an emergency executive meeting for that afternoon. This time I wasn't a surprise guest. I was there as Chief Strategy Officer, a position she'd created specifically for me. The board hadn't been thrilled about it, but Victoria had made it clear. Either they trusted her decisions or they could find a new CEO. That kind of ultimatum from someone whose company was actively being attacked was either brilliant or insane. Maybe both. The conference room was packed. All the key executives, several board members, and Victoria at the head of the table. She looked different than she had at her apartment. The vulnerable woman in sweatpants was gone, replaced by the colossal queen in her armor. But when our eyes met across the room, I saw something there just for me. A thank you. A promise. An acknowledgement of what we were building together. Let's be clear about something, Victoria started, her voice cutting through the nervous chatter. We're in trouble. Meridian Corp isn't going away. Our stock price is falling. We're losing key people. If we don't turn this around in the next few weeks, Titan Industries as we know it will cease to exist. The room went silent. Victoria never sugarcoated things, but hearing her state it that bluntly drove home how serious the situation was. But here's what Meridian didn't count on, she continued. They assumed we'd panic, that we'd be too divided to mount an effective defense, that we'd simply roll over and accept defeat. They were wrong. She gestured to me. This is our new Chief Strategy Officer. He identified the vulnerability they're exploiting, which means he understands it better than anyone. Over the next hour, he's going to lay out how we're going to not just survive this attack, but come out stronger than before. All eyes turned to me. I stood up, connected my laptop to the presentation screen, and took a deep breath. This was it. Everything I'd learned about Titan, everything Victoria and I had discussed through that long night, every insight I'd gained about how this company really worked, it all came together in the plan I was about to present. Meridian thinks they're attacking a traditional corporate structure, I began. They're using a playbook that would work against most companies our size. But Titan isn't most companies. What they see as weaknesses are actually our greatest strengths when we know how to leverage them. For the next 90 minutes, I walked them through a comprehensive counter-strategy. We wouldn't just defend against the takeover. We'd turn it into an opportunity to restructure in ways that would make Titan stronger and more valuable to our existing shareholders. We'd use Meridian's own aggressive tactics against them, exposing the financial risks in their offer that they'd been hiding from our investors. But the core of my plan was something deeper. It was about reminding everyone, from employees to shareholders to industry analysts, what made Titan special in the first place. The relationships Victoria's father had built, the culture of innovation and loyalty, the fact that this company cared about its people, not just its profits. The problem isn't that we need to change who we are, I concluded. It's that we stopped telling our story effectively. Meridian is selling a narrative of a failing company. We need to show everyone the truth of a company that's evolving, adapting, and getting stronger. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then Victoria started clapping and others joined in. Not everyone was convinced, I could see that. But there was hope in that room that hadn't been there before. The real work started immediately. Victoria and I divided up responsibilities. She handled the board and the major shareholders, using her relationships and credibility.